The era between the 1940s to 1950s had been known as the McCarthy era for America, and brought about many changes and a violent opposition in beliefs. The Red Scare was known for the tragedy that plagued the country, restricting creative freedoms for artists and even creating a further rift between opposing political parties. However, the triumph within this event would be the action of taking those people who blacklist other artists from Hollywood out of power.
The House Committee on Un-American Activists was known to be a government agency by the House of Representatives. The Hollywood blacklist commenced in 1947 with the group HUAC. The group had suspicions on certain entertainment people being part of the communist group, in which the work was inspired by communists. The group mainly targeted highly known stars, writers, producers, and directors. Some writers, producers, and directors became known as Hollywood 10. The list was mainly made due to effects from the Great Depression and World War II. The American Communist Party was starting to lose support, which caused the U.S. government to turn their attention to Hollywood. The blacklist meeting began on July 29, 1946, in which William R. Wilkerson, a publisher, released a list of big names. Over the month, Wilkerson would publish more names exposing possible people connected with communism. Wilkerson exposed people such as Dalton Trumbo, Lester Cole, Maurice Raff, Howard Koch, Harold Bushman, and more. Multiple people from the list are part of the film industry were to testify at hearings. Some directors and actors started a group called Committee for the First Amendment, in which they protested the government for targeting film industries. This is made clear in Ayn Rand's testimony for the movie Song of Russia. The most creative freedoms were prohibited and viewed as propaganda. There were actors that were casted in less movies. A lot of people that were fired were great filmmakers and actors. It was estimated that around 300 people were fired. Some actors and directors were forced to step down and no longer continue their career. A few writers were able to continue the work, but under a fake name. This was a clear tragedy for many people that worked in the film industry. It was evident that these accusations would soon lead many into believing the image that the Red Scare had made.
The tragedy of the Red Scare was having a difficult lifestyle. There were two Red Scare periods. The second Red Scare started from the late 1940s to 1950s during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Communism plays a big part during the Red Scare, in which the fear of communism permeated American politics, culture, and society. Communism first became a major system of government in Russia after the Russian Revolution in 1917. It is a form of government in which its main ideal preaches equality for all in the sense of social and economic status. People were not allowed to openly practice their religion. This type of government rule frightened many Americans, especially when it was spreading Eastern Europe and China during the second period of Red Scare. Numerous of people were afraid that communism could infiltrate the United States. Also at that time, the Soviet Union were considered powerful as they have nuclear bombs. People became paranoid of anyone who they think are siding with the communists and helping the Soviets get secret information about the United States. This led to people's madness over the communists. Thus, the term anti-communist was spread. One of the main accusers against communism was Joseph McCarthy. The term McCarthy is made after him, which became a byname for defamation of character or reputation by means of widely publicized indiscriminate allegations, especially on the basis of unsubstantiated charges. Accusing people as communists without proper evidence and using intimidation and gossips, McCarthy ruined many people's careers and lives just for his benefits. The witches' accusations in the Crucible is similar to the communist accusations in the Red Scare. The play was also written by Arthur Miller, whom was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, subsequently blacklisted during the McCarthyism period.
Margaret Chase Smith would turn out to be the first senator to stand up against Joseph McCarthy, not just for herself but for every other citizen. But who really is Joseph McCarthy? Well, McCarthy was a senator during the late 1940s and early 1950s. During this time, U.S. citizens were terrified of communists as it was during the Cold War. What Joseph McCarthy did was to try and expose all communists, and according to one source, he spent almost 5 years trying in vain to expose communists and other left-wing loyalty risks in the U.S. government. This is where Margaret Chase Smith stepped in. She delivered the Declaration of Congress to the press gallery. In it, she talked about how she thought that McCarthy's accusations were dangerous. Here are important quotes from her declaration. Those of us who shout the loudest about Americanism and making character assassinations are all too frequently those who, by our own words and acts, ignore some of the basic principles of Americanism. It is high time that we all stop being tools and victims of totalitarian techniques that, if continued here unchecked, will surely end what we have come to cherish as the American way of life. The declaration, however, did not stop McCarthy from his investigations. His next big strike was at the U.S. Army, the U.S. Signal Corps Laboratory to be exact. McCarthy soon ended the investigation after quarreling with the Army for months. He did move on to Irving Perez, an Army dentist. Perez invoked the Fifth Amendment when filling out the Army's questionnaire. The Fifth Amendment states that no person is required to testify against himself or herself in a criminal case, and no person could be subjected to a second trial for an offense for which he or she has been duly tried previously. This caused Perez to be under surveillance. His paperwork was checked and Perez was soon dismissed and promoted to major. McCarthy then launched a campaign to criticize the Army for allowing Perez to be promoted. As McCarthy was interrogating General Ralph Zwicker, the senator demanded for Zwicker to reveal information. He of course denied, since he could not violate the executive order. This caused McCarthy to get mad and compared Zwicker's intelligence to that of a 5-year-old's. The rude treatment that McCarthy gave to the general caused a lot of hostility from the press and American public. The Senate then started hearings into the Perez matter. The investigations and hearings between McCarthy and the Army were publicly televised, and everyone saw how rude Joseph McCarthy really was. To the American public, he was now a cruel, manipulative, and reckless senator. Not only did television ruin his career, but also a documentary by journalist Edward R. Murrow was released that showed how McCarthy used bullying techniques to harass individuals. This caused for a censor on December 2nd by a margin of 67 to 22.
One of the most opposing forces in the Second Red Scare was the House of Un-American Activities Committee, or the DICE Committee, back in 1938, which investigated any disloyalty or alleged opposition against the government. It was initially formed for rising Nazi parties that would later on be a part of the hysteria of coveted communist parties. The Smith Act of 1940 was passed only 2 years afterward. It made it illegal to help any groups that opposed the government rule in America. This would be one of the many factors that would lead to charges against alleged communists. On February 4th, 1945, 3 chief Allied leaders, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin would meet in Soviet town Yalta to discuss the re-establishment of conquered nations. Russia had wanted Poland to establish a communist government. However, both Britain and the US had new leaders in power, so they opposed the idea. Eastern Europe would then fall into the USSR during the 1940s and the centralized government in Moscow. On March 5th, 1946, Winston Churchill said,
"In the Baltic, to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent."
His famous Iron Curtain speech declared the occasion of the spread of communism officially. This spread of communism within Eastern Europe caused many Americans to fear the movement. Furthermore, the inclusion of the Moscow government gaining even more power. The Truman Doctrine was made in response to this spread, including the abandonment of many British officers in Greece against the Greek Communist Party during 1947. The doctrine announced that any democratic nations would receive political, military, and economic support if they were ever threatened with authoritarian forces.
The supposed witch hunt from 1692 would soon be comparative to the Second Red Scare and synonymous to McCarthyism. This event was evident in the many lives that were convicted and even prosecuted against. In reality, it began to show the U.S. more of the potential corruption within the government in charge. Propaganda or not, the Red Scare had an impact on society, leading to the creation of dissonance we know of between the government and the general populace. The Crucible makes it clear within its play. Arthur Miller writes, "A political policy is equated with moral right, and opposition to it with diabolical malevolence."